And now with more on the latest security updates, former IDF spokesperson to the foreign media, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Peter Lerner. Peter, between the two attacks on Joseph's tomb and the multiple stabbing, shooting attempts, what's your take on the last 24 hours of security operations?
So here's what we know. We know that the IDF is currently engaging, trying to address probably the three core issues of this recent wave of terror. First of all, is taking the fight to those would-be terrorists to try and make them have a sense of being pursued. They're doing that in order to make sure that they don't have an easy skip over into Israel and Israeli cities. The second component is strengthening the defenses. So we have this ongoing influx of battalions that are reinforcing the seam zone area. And finally, having rapid reaction capabilities in order to mobilize when intelligence comes in order to foil any potential threat as it happens. So I would say in the last 24 hours, we've seen ongoing IDF search and arrest activities. I think last night it was 13 Palestinians that have been detained, and this is ongoing. Of course, that comes with other challenges, and I think that the biggest challenge that the IDF has is maintaining the differentiation between the civilian population and those terrorists. In the meantime, it seems that Ramadan and the access to holy sites in Jerusalem over the weekend and on Friday seems to be continuing. So it looks like the message of differentiation is continuing.
Well, so
but there's problems with increased friction.
Well, so is this a normal amount, or is this more than usual in your experience? And why does it seem like Israel is always on the defensive, or do we just not see or report so much on the offensive operations?
So I would say that, and from my experience and from my knowledge, IDF is operating every day, every night to counter and foil terrorist attacks originating from the West Bank, from Judea and Samaria. So if that's the situation, sometimes it doesn't really make it slips beneath the radar of the media, but it is a daily action that is taking place. I think what we have seen over the last few days, especially because of this increase in successful terrorist activities, is an increase in offensive activities by the IDF, in some of those in broad daylight. Everywhere in the West Bank. We've seen it throughout, from Hebron in the south to Jenin in the north. So I think maybe we tend to push aside and pocket those activities usually, but they are ongoing. And I would say the vast majority of terrorist attacks over the last few years have been foiled. This is an unfortunate reality.
All right, the coalition announced over 300 million shekel investment in patching up and boosting the security barrier. But settler leaders are actually, they don't want the wall, saying that it's unnecessary, incites more anger and terror, and fails to deal with the real issue at heart. Do you agree?
So I think any defensive mechanism needs to be maintained. If you're putting up a fence, you need to defend that fence. You need to have the forces, you need to have the technology in order to utilize the defensive mechanism. But of course, it is successful, and it has proven successful since it was established in 20 years ago. So you have to keep that in mind. There's always a trade-off, and I think what we know is the barrier is actually a barrier, and it makes it a lot more difficult, even if it's not foolproof. And there is no defensive mechanism in the world that is 100% foolproof. So I think we have to aspire, and I think the decision yesterday by the cabinet to reinforce and to patch up, as you said, is actually aspiring to increase that level of putting a barrier in front of those terrorists that want to skip over the fence. So I would think it's a good move to make. I think definitely in the reality that we're facing, the government can't ignore it. But I understand that there is a challenge when you erect such a defensive mechanism, that it needs to be maintained. If you don't maintain it, then it will deteriorate naturally, just out of natural causes of weather and so on. But if you're putting up a fence, you need to maintain it.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Lerner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today.
Subscribe at ILTV.tv and watch from any device.